Alex Richards was known around campus for his quick wit and warm, approachable demeanor. He excelled in both academics and the social scene, striking a rare balance that made him stand out. Leah Johnson, on the other hand, was more understated, a literature major whose passion for poetry and quiet resilience made her admired but somewhat mysterious. They first met during a fall evening at a university debate club event, where Alex, a political science major, volunteered as a speaker. Leah attended for the first time, drawn by curiosity. The connection was instant but nuanced. Alex noticed Leah listening intently, her dark, wavy hair cascading around her shoulders as she scribbled notes. Afterward, as the group dispersed, he caught up with her, sparking their first conversation with a light tease about her fierce note-taking. Leah's eyes sparkled as she retorted, "Someone has to keep track of all the contradictions." They shared a laugh, the kind that echoes beyond the moment and hints at something deeper. Their relationship blossomed amidst late-night study sessions in the library, cups of hot chocolate on park benches, and lazy Sunday afternoons reading together at a cafe near campus. Their differences complemented each other. Where Alex was assertive and quick to challenge, Leah was introspective and strategic. Friends marveled at how they balanced each other's energy. After Leah's graduation, Alex proposed in the very cafe where they shared countless hours, slipping an understated ring onto her finger with a whispered, "Let's make more stories together." Leah's eyes brimmed with tears as she nodded, their laughter filling the tiny space once more. Marriage came swiftly, a summer wedding in a garden surrounded by their closest friends and family. It was an intimate affair with personal touches, like handwritten poems by Leah placed on tables and a speech from Alex that had everyone in tears. As they stood under a trellis of soft pink roses, the sunlight filtered through, wrapping them in a warm glow that matched the joy in their eyes. Their early married life was a testament to their synergy. They moved into a modest apartment in the city, its cozy corners soon filled with books and keepsakes from their college days. Leah began working as an editor at a publishing house, while Alex joined a think tank focused on policy reform. Their days were busy but full, with evenings spent cooking experimental recipes that sometimes ended with takeout when their efforts went awry. 2 years later, they welcomed their first child, a boy named Ethan. Parenthood brought a new kind of happiness. Ethan had Alex's playful eyes and Leah's quiet determination, turning their sleepless nights into moments of laughter and exhaustion-tinged love. Their second child, Emily, arrived 3 years later, completing their little family. Emily was a bundle of energy, her laughter bouncing through their home and sparking impromptu dance sessions that Ethan eagerly joined. Despite the demands of their careers and raising 2 children, they maintained their connection through small gestures, post-it notes with quotes from books they loved, surprise coffee runs, and sharing the daily highlights before bed. Their love seemed unshakable. But life, with its myriad of challenges, has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Still, in those early years, surrounded by the comfort of their growing family and the warmth of shared dreams, Alex and Leah were inseparable, entwined in a life they both cherished beyond words. This narrative captures their journey from their first meeting to the early years of family life. It started as a joke, the kind shared among friends when laughter flows as freely as the wine. Alex and Leah had attended a dinner party hosted by their close friends, Matt and Emily Lang, known for their lively gatherings that blended sophisticated conversation with the edge of unpredictability. The air was buzzing with chatter, an undercurrent of playful banter threading through the evening. Midway through the night, the conversation shifted to a topic that piqued everyone's interest: relationship taboos. Matt, ever the provocateur with a devilish grin and a glass of whiskey permanently glued to his hand, leaned in and said, "So, let's settle this. The hall pass, myth or a healthy part of a marriage?" Gasps and giggles erupted, a mix of discomfort and intrigue. Leah's brow furrowed as she glanced at Alex, who met her gaze with a raised eyebrow, amused. "I mean, theoretically, if you had one person," Emily chimed in, brushing her auburn curls back, "wouldn't that take the edge off temptation? Make things more honest?" The room quieted for a moment, the weight of the topic settling in. Leah sipped her wine thoughtfully, feeling a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. It had been a long time since anything about marriage felt thrilling or new. I think it depends on trust, Alex said, his tone half serious. A few chuckled, Matt among them. Are we really doing this? He said, leaning back with a grin. Okay, Leah, who would be yours? Leah blinked, caught off guard by the sudden spotlight. A teasing smirk formed at the corners of her lips. I don't know. Maybe an actor? The room dissolved into playful protests and cheers. But beneath the laughter, Leah felt a pulse of something deeper, a quiet question she tucked away. Over the next few days, the topic clung to her like an unshed skin. She replayed the scene, the daring questions, Alex's carefree smile. Their life was good, solid, but also predictable. The days blurred into each other, work, school pickups, late dinners. The longing for a spark crept in, one she was almost ashamed to acknowledge. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Leah was at the publishing house, finishing edits on a manuscript filled with the kind of passion she once felt defined her and Alex. She received a message from an old college friend, Mark Talbot, who had recently moved back to town. Mark had been one of Alex's roommates and the quintessential bad boy, tall, with inked sleeves and eyes that could both smolder and tease. Leah felt her stomach flip at his message. Long time no see. Drinks? Catch up like old times? Her thumb hovered over her phone. Memories of old group outings surfaced. Mark's laughter ringing out, the way he'd thrown playful winks her way when Alex wasn't looking. She had always dismissed those moments, but now an ember sparked within her. She typed back a casual sure, why not? Before she could overthink. That night, Alex arrived home, the kids clambering over him with squeals of daddy. Leah watched them, a tight smile masking the knot of guilt and thrill inside her. Everything okay? Alex asked as he leaned in to kiss her cheek, his eyes searching hers. She nodded too quickly, feeling like the walls were shifting around her. The following evening, Leah met Mark at a bar tucked in a corner of downtown, the kind where the lights were dim and the world outside felt miles away. He was waiting at a table, looking effortlessly confident in a black button-up that hinted at the tattoos beneath. Leah Johnson. Or should I say Mrs. Richards? He said, his voice smooth and teasing. Still the same Leah, she replied, a flicker of defiance sparking in her eyes. Their conversation flowed as if no time had passed, skipping from college memories to musings on life's disappointments and joys. Mark's laughter was magnetic, his attention intoxicating. As the hours melted, he leaned forward, his voice dropping. Did you ever think about how different things would have been if it was us back then? Leah's heart pounded at the boldness of his question. She met his gaze, feeling a heat rush up her spine. Maybe, she whispered, the word a confession and a dare. Mark's hand brushed hers, and time seemed to freeze. They kissed, tentative at first, then deepening with a hunger long dormant. The next morning, Leah woke to a gnawing mixture of exhilaration and panic. Alex had taken the kids to school, oblivious, cheerful. She stood in the kitchen, fingers brushing the cool edge of the countertop, recalling the sensation of Mark's lips, his whispered promises. The guilt clashed with a newfound sense of liberation. Had she crossed the line they joked about that night at Matt's? It wasn't a theoretical anymore. It was real and searingly alive. Days turned to weeks, the weight of her secret pressing harder. Mark's texts kept coming, each one pulling her deeper. Alex noticed the change, his playful nudges met with distracted smiles, and evenings once filled with stories about their day felt silent, strained. Leah's heart ached with the tension between the life she had and the one she dared to touch. Then, one night, as they lay in bed, Alex turned to her, voice tinged with worry. Leah, where are you these days? You're here, but not really. His question, so honest and raw, sliced through her defenses. She met his eyes, unable to answer, wondering how much longer she could hold onto the frayed edges of her double life. The publishing world often demanded its participants to travel, to network, to absorb the atmosphere of ideas buzzing within conference halls and banquets. For Leah, these events were both invigorating and exhausting, spaces where the boundaries between the mundane and extraordinary could blur with a cocktail in hand and an eager crowd. It was during one of these conferences in San Francisco, a city veiled in fog and frenetic energy, that Leah found herself drawn into a series of events that would unravel her life. She attended as a representative for her publishing house, tasked with scoping out potential authors and trends. The atmosphere at the event was electric, a collage of sharp suits, murmured ideas, and clinking glasses. Among the speakers was a man who made the room pause, Julian Hart, an author whose enigmatic novels had captured a global audience and whose face graced literary magazines with striking regularity. He was lean, with dark hair that fell artfully across his forehead and a voice as rich as the stories he penned. Leah hadn't anticipated their paths crossing beyond a distant glance or a handshake. But later that night, in the hotel bar where attendees mingled over amber-lit drinks, Julian approached her with a crooked smile. "You're Leah, from Crestline Publishing, right?" "I've heard good things," he said, his tone effortlessly charming. She stammered a reply, caught off guard by his presence so close, his cologne subtly spiced and compelling. They settled into conversation that felt organic, talking shop, then drifting to shared interests. Julian's laughter was like a hook, drawing her in. Hours passed unnoticed, marked only by the ebb and flow of drinks refilled by an attentive bartender. At some point, his hand brushed hers, a deliberate touch that made Leah's breath catch. A silent offer, a choice. The pulse of the room faded, and when he leaned in, she didn't turn away. The next morning, sunlight pierced through the hotel blinds with accusatory clarity. Leah woke in Julian's suite, her heart hammering as she tried to piece together the night. His arm was draped over her waist, and she slipped out from under it, retrieving her scattered clothes in a rush. Panic clawed at her as reality set in, and she dressed quickly, slipping out before he stirred. Back home, the world resumed its familiar pace. Alex noticed her distance, the way she seemed to move through their days with an odd detachment. He tried to reconnect, family movie nights, impromptu drives, but the weight of her secret made her presence brittle. It was a week later, during an evening when Alex was finishing work at the dining table, that he noticed Leah's phone buzz repeatedly beside him. "Leah, your phone's going crazy," he called out, but she was upstairs bathing Emily, her laughter faint against the splash of water. Out of instinct, he glanced at the screen. The first message preview read, "Last night was unforgettable. When can I see you again?" The words hit Alex like a cold slap. He picked up the phone, hesitating as guilt and curiosity warred within him, but the second message came almost immediately, "I can't stop thinking about you." "Julian." Hands shaking, Alex unlocked the phone. Leah had never hidden her passcode, a trust that now felt like a blade. Scrolling through, he found a thread of messages, photos of the conference, a picture of Leah with Julian at a bar, eyes lit with a spark Alex hadn't seen in years. He read on, each line sinking him deeper into an icy pool of disbelief. There were hints, coy replies from Leah, lines she wouldn't dare speak aloud in their home. One photo undid him completely, Julian's hand resting possessively on Leah's waist, her smile both familiar and foreign. The betrayal wasn't just in the physical act but in the intimacy captured in that single frame, the casualness of stolen affection. Alex's breath came in ragged gasps as he shut the phone and placed it back on the table, its surface suddenly as alien as the woman upstairs singing softly to their daughter. The room blurred around him, memories of their life together colliding with the raw, current pain. He felt the floor beneath him shift, as if the foundation of their home was splintering. When Leah came downstairs, still toweling her damp hair, she spotted Alex's stricken face immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tight with a trace of unease. Alex's eyes met hers, fury and heartbreak mingling in a stare that made her steps falter. "You tell me, Leah. What's going on between you and Julian Hart?" The color drained from her face, the towel slipping from her grasp. Her mouth opened, closed, then trembled as she struggled for words that wouldn't come. A thick silence enveloped them, pierced only by the creak of the house settling, a reminder of everything built and now teetering on the edge of collapse. Alex stood, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I deserve the truth," he said, each word deliberate, raw. Leah sank into a chair, tears welling up, but it was the expression in Alex's eyes, more hollow than rageful, that told her she had already lost something irreplaceable. The courtroom was packed, the tense silence broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers and the murmured exchange of the attorneys. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, slanting across polished benches where spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers sat shoulder to shoulder. This was not just a divorce hearing. It was the kind of salacious drama that caught the public's attention, a betrayal that had laid bare a seemingly perfect marriage. Alex sat at the plaintiff's table, his suit tailored but now loose against the weight he'd lost in the past weeks. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Meredith Hayes, flipped through the neatly arranged evidence, printouts of messages, photos from Leah's phone, and hotel records. Alex's jaw was set, his fingers gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles blanched. Leah sat on the opposite side, her expression tight, eyes downcast. She wore a simple dress, chosen deliberately to convey humility, but nothing could mask the exhaustion etched into her face. Her lawyer, Nathan Rourke, leaned in close, whispering urgently. She nodded, but the subtle tremble of her hands betrayed her resolve. The presiding judge, a middle-aged man with a stern face named Judge Crawford, cleared his throat and addressed the room. We are gathered today to hear the case of Richards versus Richards. This court will determine the validity of the claims and the evidence provided. The first hour was procedural, introductions, legal jargon, and background. But when Meredith Hayes rose, her voice slicing through the room, the atmosphere shifted. Your Honor, we submit into evidence Exhibit A, she announced, lifting a bundle of printed messages. These communications between Mrs. Richards and Mr. Julian Hart establish clear evidence of infidelity. A collective murmur swept the room. Leah stared at her lap, avoiding the penetrating stares of onlookers and, more painfully, the guarded eyes of Alex. Meredith walked over to Judge Crawford, placing the papers in front of him. Note, Your Honor, the detailed nature of these exchanges, spanning several weeks prior to and after the San Francisco conference. Leah's lawyer stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. This evidence, while provocative, does not establish a full context. Meredith interjected smoothly. The context is irrelevant when the intent and actions are clear, Mr. Rourke. The messages corroborate the claim of infidelity. Judge Crawford, without looking up, waved a hand. Objection overruled. Proceed. Alex felt a swell of conflicting emotions. This was his vindication, yet each piece of damning evidence was a needle twisting deeper into wounds that had not yet begun to heal. Meredith continued, detailing the timeline, cross-referencing Leah's messages with hotel bookings, and producing a statement from a hotel employee who confirmed seeing her and Julian together. When Leah's turn came, Nathan Rourke stood, adjusting his tie with a practiced composure. Your Honor, Mrs. Richards wishes to make a statement. Leah rose shakily, her eyes finding Alex for the first time that day. They were rimmed red, haunted. I don't deny that I acted poorly, Leah began, her voice quivering as she clutched the edges of the podium. But what these messages do not show is the state of our marriage, the distance, the loneliness that led me to make mistakes. The room was silent, hanging on her words. A few reporters scribbled furiously, eyes darting up and down from their notepads. Alex's stomach churned at her attempt to shift the narrative. Meredith leaned over to whisper in his ear. Stay calm. Don't react. Leah's lawyer attempted to pivot the focus to their strained marriage, emphasizing long hours, the emotional vacuum that had settled between them, and the stress of parenthood. But Meredith was prepared. Your Honor, while Mrs. Richards' statement is a plea for empathy, we cannot ignore that this is not about marital strain alone. It is about deception, premeditated actions, and the deliberate concealment of those actions. Meredith then presented Exhibit B, a series of deleted texts and hidden photos recovered from Leah's cloud backup, establishing further evidence of her attempts to cover her tracks. The courtroom buzzed again, louder this time. Leah's breath caught audibly, eyes wide in stunned silence as even Nathan turned to her, brows furrowed. Judge Crawford's face hardened as he reviewed the new material. Mrs. Richards, can you explain these attempts to delete evidence relevant to your case? His tone was clipped, unforgiving. Leah's mouth opened, closed, the room swallowing her silence. Alex's gaze remained steady, though beneath it, his heart pounded with anger and a gnawing sadness. He remembered the nights he lay awake next to her, oblivious to the double life unraveling just beyond reach. The judge shifted in his seat. "This court takes evidence tampering seriously, Mrs. Richards. Your actions not only speak to the infidelity but to an effort to mislead this court and your spouse." Nathan leaned in, whispering furiously, but Leah's posture slumped. Whatever defense she had hoped to mount now crumbled under the weight of her own choices. The hearing dragged into the afternoon, punctuated by testimonies from mutual friends who reluctantly corroborated Alex's claims. Matt, their once carefree host, appeared subdued as he described noticing Leah's detachment and Alex's attempts to reach her. His testimony, coupled with Leah's own texts, painted a damning portrait. Finally, Judge Crawford issued his ruling. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds Mrs. Richards guilty of marital misconduct. Custodial and financial decisions will be deferred pending further evaluation, but it is clear that trust, a cornerstone of any marriage, has been breached in this case. The gavel struck, reverberating through the silence that followed. Leah sank into her seat, tears streaming silently as Alex stood, numb but resolute. This was only the beginning of their uncharted path, fragmented, painful, but necessary. As the courtroom emptied, Alex caught Leah's gaze one last time, seeing not the woman he once knew but a stranger haunted by choices that could never be taken back. The days following the trial were marked by an unforgiving silence in Alex's world. The whispers of betrayal echoed in his mind, a relentless soundtrack that turned even the most mundane tasks into painful reminders. He moved through their now empty house with mechanical precision, packing away photo albums, stowing childhood crafts by Ethan and Emily, removing any trace of the life they had built and Leah had shattered. Leah, on the other hand, found herself living in the fallout. The publishing house placed her on indefinite leave, citing concerns over professional conduct, as her private life had become tabloid fodder. Julian Hart, the man at the center of her ruin, issued a public statement denying any serious relationship, effectively casting her as an expendable figure in a sordid tale. Friends who once sought her opinion now distanced themselves, uncomfortable with her newfound infamy. Desperate to make amends, Leah reached out to Alex through letters, pages filled with apologies and explanations scrawled in hurried, looping handwriting. She recounted memories, pleaded for forgiveness, confessed to her loneliness and poor choices. The letters sat unopened in a growing stack on the kitchen counter until one evening, frustration gnawed at Alex. He ripped them open, one after another, skimming the words that flailed with desperation and regret. The following day, Leah stood at their doorstep, a soft knock announcing her presence. She was thinner, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, yet they glistened with hope. When Alex opened the door, he felt a pang of recognition. This was the woman he'd once built a life with, now a stranger burdened by choices she couldn't take back. "Alex," she began, her voice breaking. "Can we talk? Please, just hear me out." He hesitated, the muscles in his jaw clenching. Memories of laughter and shared dreams surfaced, but they were drowned by the bitter taste of betrayal. "There's nothing left to say, Leah," he replied, his voice low, steady. "Please, just one conversation. For the sake of what we had. For the kids," she added, a last-ditch plea that hung in the cold evening air. Alex exhaled sharply, stepping aside reluctantly. They sat at the kitchen table, where so many decisions had once been made over morning coffee or late-night discussions. Now it felt like a battlefield. "I know you don't owe me anything," Leah said, her hands twisting nervously. "But I can't let us end like this. I was wrong in every way, but I loved you. I still do." Alex's eyes flashed with anger. "You loved me? When, Leah? When you were laughing with him? When you were deleting evidence, trying to cover your tracks? Love isn't what you did." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, accepting the blow. "I can't undo what happened. But I'm here now, ready to fight for us." He laughed, a short, bitter sound that cut through the room. "Fight for us? The fight ended when you chose him over everything we built. Do you understand that?" His voice cracked, betraying the pain still raw beneath the anger. There is no us left to fight for. Silence filled the space between them. Leah looked down, defeated. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, memories pressing against the walls, their wedding day, Ethan's first steps, Emily's sleepy giggles during bedtime stories. Alex stood abruptly, the weight too much to bear. "Leah, it's over," he said quietly, his tone carrying finality. "You need to accept that and move on. For your sake and the kids." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, tears streaming freely now. She reached out as if to touch his arm but stopped herself, letting her hand fall. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words trailing off into the air like smoke. As she left, the sound of her car door closing echoed in the twilight, a punctuation to the end of their story. Alex stood by the window, watching her drive away until her car was a speck swallowed by the road. The house was silent again, but this time, it felt different, emptied of even the ghost of reconciliation. In the weeks that followed, Leah moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. She spent her days piecing her life back together, visiting the kids at prearranged times, enduring the tight-lipped stares of parents at school pickups, and working with her lawyer to navigate the complexities of shared custody. Alex kept his interactions brief, practical, speaking only when necessary. Ethan sensed the shift, his bright eyes dulled by questions he wasn't old enough to ask. Emily, still too young to grasp the full weight of it, only knew that Mommies lived somewhere else now. At work, whispers trailed Leah like a shadow. Her professional reputation was scarred, opportunities once within reach now distant. Meanwhile, Alex found solace in the structured chaos of his think tank, throwing himself into late nights and debates, each hour a buffer against the personal storm that threatened to engulf him. Months passed, turning the fresh wounds into scar tissue. The final divorce papers arrived on a gray Thursday, the kind of day that held no particular meaning. Alex signed without hesitation, the weight lifting just enough for him to breathe deeply for the first time in what felt like years. Leah signed too, her hands steady but her heart heavy. She kept one copy of the papers, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of the fragility of choices and the cost of missteps. For Alex, the end was both a closure and an open wound, a dichotomy he'd learned to live with. The house still echoed with memories, but they no longer threatened to undo him. Instead, they were just that, memories, distant and muted, part of a chapter now closed.